What is flippity floppin', guys? My name's Will from Ghosthack, and today, with my enormous brain, I will unlock the secrets of Serum's matrix, and will reveal the knowledge held within. So basically, we're going to be looking into Serum today, and I'm going to go in depth on the matrix, and I'm going to explain everything I possibly can about Serum's matrix, how it is used, and how every individual part works, so you can understand Serum under the hood a little better. So step 1 is to acquire Serum. We got it. Step 2 is to open up to the matrix, and suddenly you are presented with this little boxes of weird lines and shapes and knobs. Now this layout here may look kind of complex and complicated. It gets all sciencey and into engineering. You would just want to make music, but I can break this down for you so it's a lot easier to understand. There are actually 9 different little sections to this, and they all go one after the other, left to right. So I'm going to take you through and show you what each one of them does. So we have source, we have curve, amount, destination, type, mod, Aux source, curve, and output. All of these are separated into these categories right here. And like I said, the signal kind of flows left to right. But the first thing I want to focus on first is the source and the destination. Now the matrix itself is designed to display all the modulations in Serum that are happening, all the stuff that's going on, all the things that are moving around inside of Serum. Like you can't access like the wavetables from here, you know what I'm saying? That can only happen here. But if I decide to create some modulation, let's say I want to modulate the level of this saw wave up and down with LFO1, I can go like this, and now I have a lovely modulated saw wave. Some headphones would really be useful for hearing audio. So we have our beautiful modulated saw wave. And this whole thing is pretty simple. It's very easy to understand, the saw wave going up and down with LFO1 on this level. Well, essentially, this is what the matrix maps out. Boom, we already have something going on in the matrix here just by adding a very simple thing just in the oscillator section, a very simple modulation. And now you can see kind of what each thing does. This source is basically the controller, the modulator, the thing that's moving around, whether this be an LFO or an envelope or a macro or maybe one of these. This is basically what's doing the controlling right here, is this source. And then we look at the destination, we have a volume. And now you can click these and you can open up and you can see all the possible sources here. Like if I wanted to instead do this to LFO2, I could just route this into LFO2 and boom, you see this has automatically happened right here, and I could create a different shape. Maybe something double like this. If I wanted to do that instead, I could just change the LFO to LFO2, and then I could just create this shape, right? And then the destination is still a volume. If I wanted to change the destination, maybe I could go under here and see what else I could do. Maybe I could change the destination from oscillator A volume to oscillator A coarse pitch. Of course, once we go back and turn the volume back up to normal, now that LFO right there is controlling the coarse pitch instead of the volume, because we set it to control the coarse pitch. That's the destination. The destination is what is being controlled, and the source is the controller itself. And you may be able to guess what the amount is. The amount is the amount of actual modulation going on. Like if I were to change this back to a volume right here, we can see this amount is going up and down at this rate. You can see it right there, and it is reflected right here. If I brought this down to really tiny right there, now suddenly this is really tiny as well. We can control both of those at once just by moving one of these. They will always match. Now you may notice here that this is going left to right here instead of just one direction like this. It's going left to right, and I'll get to how you can change that with this type mode in a second. But right now I want to just take a look at this curve. Now what could this curve mean? Well, if you click and drag in this little window right here, you can see that we kind of bend this shape up and down like that. And this is going to control kind of the rate at which this LFO could change the source, right? From which the destination changes the source. It controls the response you get from the modulation. And to kind of explain this a little simpler, let me go ahead and initialize the patch. And I'm just going to do the same thing again where we have a saw wave and we have a level. But right now I'm going to do it a little bit differently. right? I'm going to create a little triangle wave here, and now I'm going to control the level. So we go from 0 to 75. And as you can hear, we're clearly going up and down in volume in this shape right here. But listen to what happens if I manipulate this curve. It stays up much longer. See, this curve basically reflects how long it takes for this LFO to get all the way to 100%. Let's just pretend this is a little graph. Let's say this bottom right here represents kind of the input of the source, and this side one right here represents the output of the source. Now, if the LFO wants to go all the way up from 0 to 100, it has to go from here to here. And because this line is going straight all the way up, the output will also be from there to there. It will be perfectly even, exact. But if I bring this curve up right here, now you can see about halfway through this curve's travel, it's already reached maximum, right about there. So that means at halfway through this LFO, the LFO has actually reached about maximum. It's making it do something looking a little more like this. Is just shaping that curve to make it come up to the maximum amount faster this way. And we can take it down the other way as well. And we can say only at this very tip top of the modulation is it really hitting anywhere above 0. We can kind of beefing it up, or we can tighten it out. If you're still a little hazy on what exactly it means, I just recommend that you kind of mess around with it and then just, change the curve and see what kind of results you get. Eventually, it will kind of click in your head how the thing works. But now the next section right here is the type section. And this is where you can have either one arrow representing unipolar or click. Boom, 2 arrows representing bipolar. And this correlates with the modulation that you have going right here. Like, for example, if I have this happening, you can see this is unipolar. Uni meaning one. It's going one direction. It starts from where you wanted it to, and it goes in the direction you want. See, if I have it going up here with this amount in the matrix, if I were to have it going down in this amount, then we could go back here and we can see that now the modulation is going down. But bipolar means 2, and it's going both ways. So let's flip it to bipolar mode right there. And now we can see that our favorite spot, our spot where the knob is actually in the middle, right? And when we do this, it spreads out on both sides. You can control that with this right here. You can quickly switch between bipolar and unipolar. Now the modulation section right here gets a little bit tricky because it actually stems from the auxiliary source. So I'm going to explain the auxiliary source first, and then I'm going to tell you how the mod works. The mod is actually pretty simple. But let's say that I really wanted to take advantage of Serum's matrix and I wanted to give this saw wave some vibrato. I think it could use some vibrato. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to select my source. I'm going to select my source as LFO1, and I'm going to create kind of a vibrato shape for LFO1 because, again, the source is the controller and the destination is the thing actually being controlled. So here we are, LFO1, it's on off. Let's uncheck BPM and leave it at about, 8.5. So now we have our LFO set up, but we need to connect it to a destination. What you want to do here is you want to go into global and then master tune. So that should be controlling the master tune, but we haven't upped the amount at all. We have to up the amount at least a little bit. If I were to do even a good bit like this, it would be way too much. We want this just a little bit right here, maybe just at 1. So there's a very kind of dramatic vibrato that we have right there because we created the vibrato shape with LFO1 and then connected it to the master tune with just a little bit of amount. We want to go bipolar for this one right here. Make sure the arrow is going both ways because we don't want it to start at one note and then just move up from that note. What we want is it to go back and forth, and that root note being right in the middle. So that's where bipolar comes in handy. Now that's all well and good, but we don't want vibrato hitting all the time on our lead. That's not what we want. This is an amazing saw lead right here, and we need to kind of add variation and give it life. So what do? We modulate the vibrato to only come in certain spots, but How do you do that? That is where the auxiliary source comes in. The auxiliary source is basically a fader for this whole thing, almost as an effect. Like you can control the amount that this modulation is even happening at all just through this aux source. So just to show you this, let's add, for example, macro 1 right here. Now you can see I have macro 1 selected down here. If I turn macro 1 up and I play this sound, a lot of vibrato going on here. But if I bring down macro 1, no more vibrato. So thinking of this as kind of a dry, wet knob for this modulation is really the best way to go about it. In reality, it is this knob right here, this output knob, that you can just assign to anything else. I could assign it to another LFO if I wanted. I could assign it to an envelope, my mod wheel. I could assign it anywhere. But macro 1 is a pretty easy thing to do. And now that auxiliary source has kind of been explained, what does this mod section do? Well, this mod section only has 3 options. First one is just your normal little star right here, which basically does nothing. But then down below it, we have the star, except it's inverted. So what does this mean? This basically means that what you've set as your aux source now gets inverted. It gets flipped around. So 0% is 100 and 100% is 0. And like I can show you this on the macro. You see the macro is all the way down, which normally if it was just on the star would mean absolutely no vibrato. But since we inverted it, now left is right and right is left. So now when I click it, we get vibrato. And then when I turn up macro 1, we get no vibrato. So it just switches those poles right there. It's really not too complicated of a concept, but there's one other thing you could do with this, and this is just using it to bypass the entire modulation. Just nothing happens throughout this whole thing. Guess what? Remember that curve that we talked about earlier? Well, there's another one over here, and it does exactly the same thing, but to the aux source. So let's say that I have this vibrato, but I only want it to vibrato when this macro is all the way up at almost the very top. Basically, I can go like this. I can change this curve to say, okay, there will be no progress made up until almost the very end of this modulation right here, where it'll zip up really fast. And now we can listen to this. And you can hear just in this end part, that's where the progress is actually being made with the vibrato. And I could do it the opposite way. I could say I want it to start vibratoing really quickly, just really fast right there. If you're still kind of struggling to grasp this curve, the best way I can describe it is this makes high modulation even higher, even quicker. And this makes it really hard for a modulation to really make progress changing the sound unless the modulation is very strong. And lastly, we have this little output knob. And like I said, this is just like the aux source. This is basically just a dry wet of this whole chain right here, this whole vibrato. Let's bring the macro all the way up. That's kind of a dry wet. And what this would be used for is, let's say that I couldn't get it precise on like 1 or +1 or +1 or something like that, and I had to do like 4. That's way too much. That's not a good vibrato at all. I want to bring down this output right there. So now that's a little more manageable, and we can still use the aux source. So we have not sacrificed our capabilities of kind of using a dry wet modulation for this thing. And so this is basically all the information contained in one modulation that we have going right here. Again, this is just pitch modulation. LFO1 is controlling the master tune by just a little bit of an amount. The type is bipolar, the modulation is completely normal, and I have an aux source macro 1 that controls the level of the vibrato. The curve stayed the same. I brought down the output a little bit so it's not too dramatic, and we have our vibrato. That is just one of many different modulations that you can make. You can do all kinds of stuff in here, and especially when you get into complex presets, such as this one from NextGen presets for Serum. You can go into the matrix and you can see all the crazy stuff happening with all of these modulations. You can see everything sliding around to match this movement. And you can also see a nice little animation of it in these squares right here. And as you can see by looking through this, some of the most common setups really don't take advantage of all of these little tools right here. Usually it's just a source and a mount and a destination, because that's essentially what you're doing when you're just dragging a modulation right onto one of these knobs right here from an LFO. So if you still have any trouble kind of grasping this matrix, just remember that there are 9 different sections all separated out, and they go left to right from the source all the way to the output. And that way maybe you can visualize the flow of things in your brain to realize, oh yeah, it goes from the source, we can control the source curve and the amount that goes right to the destination, and then we have the little animation showing the modulation. A lot of Asians in this demonstration. But also a good way to learn about it is to just do normal modulation out here in the oscillator or the effect section, and then pop into the matrix and see how what you did affected the matrix, because the matrix is always mimicking your movements in other parts of Serum. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this was helpful and educational. Hopefully you were able to get a better understanding of Serum's matrix. Of course, if you have any questions about Serum's matrix, or maybe any other little things about Serum that you'd like to add, feel free to leave them in the comments below. We will be down there checking occasionally, and other producers will be down there as well to comment on the words that you have to say. So once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Happy producing.